thanks everybody for joining us. Really happy to have you back at another Campus Rec webinar, and super excited to have a former high school mate of mine and somebody who's doing great things in the world. So super excited to have Adrian Bradbury joining us today. So I know Adrian's going to share lots of information with you, and then Scott and I will ask some questions after that. So I was going to do this whole introduction, Adrian, but I think your presentation is probably going to talk about a lot of that. So I'll just kind of let you jump right into it if that's good with you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Awesome.
Let me share. We'll bring that up and then we'll go from there. So how's that? Perfect?
That's perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so no, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and it's great to be able to connect, and happy to share a little bit of my story, journey, kind of where we've been and where we are today, and I'm happy to answer some questions at the end of it. I kind of framed it as where we are today, but I'll take us back. And so Ascent Soccer is kind of the latest iteration of the work that we're doing in East Africa. And that tagline kind of that's there is kind of really important kind of piece of kind of the ethos of the organization, or why we do what we do around exceptional talent empowered. And I'll get into that a little bit about why and why it's ignored and what we're trying to do. So first, I guess the first thing everybody asks is why East Africa, and I'm going to come to that. But actually, I was looking at this yesterday, and then I threw this slide in because I know it's a bit of a mixed group kind of watching today, but then also a lot of students. And so when you see all the things that we've done and the different kind of pieces that we've been working on in East Africa over the last kind of now 15 or 16 years, it's going to look like that was the pathway that I chose for myself from day one. And I just wanted to share that it definitely isn't. And my success, or the work that we've done, certainly looks more like that second line than that first one. And I wanted to just put that out there and kind of what was my journey before East Africa. And so first, here we are running this soccer academy in East Africa, trying to compete with and be kind of one of the best out there, in competing with clubs in Europe and elsewhere, and trying to provide pathways for kids. And I never really played the game. I actually played university basketball. And so my journey, I was actually born and raised in Oshawa. I went off to university, played basketball in Ottawa, actually spent a year post-grad. We were just talking about this before we went on air, in the sport admin program at Durham College at the time. And so for me, it was basketball, it was sport, but was not even a thought around Africa. I ended up wandering off to Japan for a couple of years, coaching basketball, kind of playing a little bit there, came back, did some financial planning, and figured that wasn't for me. I'd always done some writing, so then started to do that freelance, ended up getting lucky and did a bunch of online stuff, did a little bit with the Raptors, and was in the media side and worked at the University of Toronto, and which is now U Sport with the Canadian University Sport way back when, doing media relations and kind of in the PR field, long before we are in this digital world. But, those were all past lives that kind of led to this. And so I think the one thing I wanted to say is, it's all about kind of what it is you're kind of delivering on and working on today. And it's been pretty fascinating that a lot of the things that we're doing today, and a lot of the things we're engaging in, and a lot of the success we're having, is because not only for me, but my co-founder, George McGuire, wasn't a straight line at all. And it was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of failure in between. And our skill set and the variety of skill set has allowed us to do what we ended up doing. And so it's been a fascinating journey. And I think expectation is a dangerous thing. And for us, we've tempered that a lot around how we do things. And I'll get into that a little bit as we go through. So if you're not sure what's next, don't worry. We just figured it out, a few years ago. So we're just getting there. So on East Africa, so on that pathway, I was at University of Toronto, and I said I had a basketball background. I had a good network of people in sport, and I just started to think about the world in a different way, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to do something else, and so at the time, again, I had some skills and some opportunity in kind of the media and fundraising area. And so we had this idea, why don't we start tapping into my athlete network, some of the people that I work with, to raise some money and raise some awareness for some of the issues kind of halfway across the world. I'd never stepped foot on the continent. I'd never been. It's just something that I've been reading about, kind of really resonated with me. And so that's what we did. We started this charity called Athletes for Africa. And I went out and talked to as many organizations as I could to figure out, if we're going to do this, where do we start? What is this going to look like? And the thing we kept hearing over and over with a lot of the organizations we talked to was the last thing the continent needs is more people who don't know what they're doing going in there and doing programming. And so that kind of gave us kind of the idea to let's just focus on raising funds, raising awareness, telling stories, and then we would co-fund projects on the ground. And so we were lucky enough to work with a few organizations that you may know of. At the time, it was AMREF, which is a Kenyan-based NGO with global offices, works in health, mostly in health and women's issues, CPAR, Canadian Physicians for Aid and Relief, and then War Child Canada, who I'm sure many people will know the name of them and the work that they do with Sam Nutt over there and their crew. And so with that, we run a few events, we did some fundraisers, and all three of the organizations did work in northern Uganda. And so at the time, so this would have been in the kind of early to mid 90s, there was a civil war that was going on in northern Uganda. And at the peak of the civil war, the biggest impact at the time was on kids, was on young people. And the biggest issue that was starting to get headlines, but not enough people knew about, was one of child soldiers and child abduction. And that was happening a lot all over northern Uganda. And so the image that you see right now are kids that they called and deemed at the time night commuters. So a lot of these rural villages that were all over communities in northern Uganda simply were not safe at night. The rebel army wasn't able to replenish forces. They weren't able to recruit for their cause. And so they started going into villages and abducting kids. And so these kids, as a means to protect themselves, walked at night into towns like Gulu, which is the largest town in northern Uganda, where there are makeshift shelters, where there was some safety and security to simply sleep at night and avoid being abducted. And so some of the kids were walking from as far as 10, kind of 12 kilometers at dusk. And at its peak, there were as many as 30 or 40,000 kids doing this every single night. So they'd trek into town. Again, they'd have their mat, so they'd have a blanket. They'd sleep in front of a church stoop or in a makeshift shelter. They'd get up at dawn and they'd make the trek home. And the story really connected with me and something I couldn't shake. And it was funny. So I was a new dad at the time. And so all those stories start to resonate in a different way. And while I was thinking about all that, I picked up this amazing scrapbook of the life of Terry Fox by Douglas Copeland. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there's lots of books out there on Terry Fox and his story, but it's a very visual book, more of a scrapbook of items and pictures and things on Terry's journey. And I had a light bulb moment, and this would have been back in the spring or early in 2005, to replicate the walk. And so that's what we did. And so those images you see on the left is me and Kieran Hayward, who's a good friend of mine, who I went to with this crazy idea. So I said to Kieran, this incredible, horrific thing is happening in northern Uganda. No one's really paying attention to it, or not, at least not enough people. What if we did what those kids were doing every single day? And so in the month of July in 2005, that's what we did. So I lived at the time in Upper Beaches, or kind of east end of the Toronto area, so which was about 12 and a half kilometers from downtown Toronto. So I went to Kieran and said, what if we did what the kids were doing for a month as a way to tell the story? We'll walk at dusk all the way into town. We'll sleep in town, outside, and then we'll make the trek home and add that to our day as just a way to tell the story. And like I said earlier, I had some media connections. I thought, maybe we'll get a bit of momentum. We'll get some people in Toronto to pay attention to this. Maybe we could get something a little bigger. We'll tell an amazing stories. People will get educated, and we'll go back to our daily lives. And so that's what we started on July 1st, 2005, and made the trek into town. And you'll see the image there of Kieran sleeping on the subway grate. It was an unseasonably cold July 1st for some reason. So we were sleeping there to stay warm, but we ended up trekking into downtown and slept right in front of the rink or the fountain at City Hall in downtown Toronto, just on that grass there. And we did that for an entire month. And what we did the first few days, I blogged it then. Every day we'd come back in the morning, we'd make the trek home at dawn, we'd have something to eat, I'd blog it, and then we'd go to work. And so the idea was, if we're going to do this, we also wanted to feel it. So let's do what the kids are doing, but add it to our normal day. And so that's what we did. And so by day three or day four, we got lucky and got featured in the Toronto Star and ended up on the front page. Globe picked up, and then I went on Wire, and then a few papers on the continent, and in Uganda picked it up. And then all of a sudden our phone started ringing. And so what happened is that then people started to join our walks in those evenings. And there was a large Acholi community, which is the tribe in northern Uganda that was most impacted by the civil war. There's a large Acholi community in Toronto. And so they started to join us. And so it was two of us that started with Gulu Walk, ended up being 300 or 400 people as we came down to the end of July. And then what ended up as being a 1 month thing kind of ended up taking over our lives. And so that was, I believe, our second annual event. And so along with what was happening in Toronto and the stories and the momentum we had in Canada, there are people from all over the world who started calling us and contacting us and say, we love what you're doing. We know all about what's happening in northern Uganda, but we don't know what to do about it. How could we do a walk like that in our part of the world? And so that's what ended up happening. And so at our peak, we started to do an annual event to do advocacy, and then also turned it into an opportunity to raise money for youth programs in the region. So at its peak, in our second annual event, which I think this was the event in Toronto, and that's wandering right down Yonge Street. And so we had at its peak 120 cities. It was 120 cities in over 25 countries all over the world who were doing walks, completely volunteer driven. And so what was a new story to me and to Kieran was something that a lot of people knew all about, but what we did became something for folks to do. And so what we thought would be this 1 month thing, and we'd go back to our normal jobs and get back to work, ended up taking over my life for a period of 5 years. And so we were quite lucky at the time too, that the UN ambassador from Canada at the time was Alan Rock. And so he was leading a working group on northern Uganda in New York. And so then we got invited to be part of that, and got involved quite a bit in the advocacy and the peace process. And then we ended up spending a lot of time in and out of Uganda, starting kind of between 2005 and 2010. And so that's me there with my now eldest son. So we were just talking about before we came on about how old my kids are. I don't think I could lift Isaac now. He'll be 21 in October. But yeah, so it was a long time ago when this happened, but it was a period that gave us an opportunity to venture to a place for the first time. And again, that's when we went with a media team from the Toronto Star when we made our first trip to visit. And so, and when we did that, and maybe we'd go back to that squiggly line at the front end of the presentation. As the war subsided, we started to make some progress on the ground, and not just us, but a whole bunch of organizations making the noise that they did. There was relative peace in the region. The story started to change. It became less about the night commuters and child abduction, and more about the internally displaced and the lack of appropriate housing and access to clean water and food. And so the issues changed a lot. And so we kind of wound Gulu Walk down for the purpose in that it was not doing the advocacy, the service it needed. It was talking about many of the wrong issues. And so we started to push our followers and groups to other organizations who were kind of staying kind of more directly linked to what was required and needed at the time. And so during that, I wandered off and also did a whole bunch of other things. I ended up at this organization called Public Inc., where we engaged kind of in issues around profit and purpose. It's a marketing firm that issues all over the world and in our own backyard. And how do we engage corporate partners to do those things while also, doing well? So if a company can do well by doing good, the idea is that they'll do more good. And so, again, it was another iteration of kind of my journey from media to then advocacy to now figuring out kind of how do we engage others in these issues in creative ways. And so while I was in Uganda, in and out, obviously saw, football and soccer and how important it was. And my kids were kind of starting to play the game, and it was something that was very important to them. And it's fascinating to see. And so balls like this one that is made simply from plastic bags, I have that ball in my living room. And it's amazing what the kids would cobble together. But everywhere you would walk, everywhere you would turn, there is a game going on. It is the most important thing. Whether it's barefoot with plastic bags like that, or whether there's a game going on any local pitch, the game is everywhere. And what was striking to me is I started to know the names of all these world-class footballers playing in all the biggest leagues in Europe, but I didn't know names of many from East Africa. West Africa, a different story from, Ghana and Senegal and Cameroon, all very common today to everybody who pays attention to the game globally, but not very many from East Africa. And so I started to dig into, why that was. And part of it was, going back to the work that we had done, it was there was a lot of unrest. It was a generally unstable place. There weren't a lot of external investment in things that weren't just need, in regards to trying to bring peace or clean water or immunization, or, trying to put up schools and provide support at a real foundational level. And so when that happens, there also isn't a lot of investment in talent. And that was something we noticed. And kind of going to that, like there's, we would see these kids, and there's a lot of amazing talent, but not a lot of opportunity. And so when we started this, kind of what is now Ascent Soccer, at the time was Football for Good, I had this idea to, why don't we kind of see what kind of level of talent is out there and see if we could do something about it. And so I was lucky enough through my networks of people, and part of the advocacy and the work we did with Gulu Walk, Steve Nash, who many will know, was very involved and was super supportive of the work that we're doing. And not only is he, a great basketballer and now coaching in the NBA, but his first love is football. And he grew up in it and is a Spurs supporter, and his brother played on the national team. His sister played at university in Canada. And so that was first and foremost for them. And so, with his network and others, I said, we want to do something. And so we got introduced to a club in West London called Brentford, who's now in the second division in England and knocking on the door to go up to the Premier League next year. That I want to do some ID. I want to bring out some experts to just have a look and see what's out here. What could this be? And so I did a small fundraiser. We had some of my contacts in the region go out and do some scouting around the region. And I said, bring in, 100, 120 of the top kids around. We'll run a 10-day camp. I'll bring out a few coaches, and let's just see what's here. How could we get started? What would this look like? And so this was as raw can be. What you see here in regards to, boots, most of the kids were in barefoot. We were playing on dirt pitches, or if there was grass, there wasn't a lot to go around. The kids have never been coached before. And so after the third or fourth day, I went to Stuart, who was one of the academy coaches from Brentford. And I said, what do you think? Is there something here? And right away, he's like, there's something here. He's like, I have no idea how you're going to do it, but there's something here. And so that was the start to figure out, how could we kind of do something in this part of the world? And so maybe to back up around, well, why is it kind of so difficult? These are, like I said, very war-torn, impoverished communities. And so just to share a little bit of the numbers of the realities of these places, like 70% of the region live on less than $2 a day. A third of primary age kids are not in school. After 15, that number goes up to 60%. So there's a lack of education. There's a lack of infrastructure. It's a very young population. Over 2/3 are under the age of 25. And Malawi, one of the countries that we work now, is ranked 5th poorest in the world. And so it's when we're in places like this, and I spoke earlier around, healthcare and immediate needs around school fees. When we're talking about investing in talent, that takes a lot of time and it takes patience. And we know with whatever we are, engaged in or curious about, or whatever we wanted to achieve, be it at scholastic or through sport or else, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort for us to get there, to go on a journey of excellence. And so if you're living hand to mouth, you're just existing day to day, local communities don't necessarily have the tools or the opportunity to be able to do those things. And so that's what we were thinking about, is how do we, in a time where so much investment is in basic needs, could we still invest in talent? And we've become, we're big believers that if we're going to make impacts in places like Uganda and Malawi, that we can't just invest in basic, the fundamentals. We also need to invest in talent, because it's not me or George, one guy from Canada or another guy from the UK who's going to change these communities. It's going to be kids from these communities, but we need to give them additional levels of support and nurturing and sport and education and character development for them to be able to do those things. And so that's where we've landed. So it's about digging deep in few to give them opportunities. And so that's kind of the ethos about what we're trying to do. So it's not just kind of talking about it and providing school fees for a few, but like really digging deep and investing deeply in that talent. And so what we've done kind of between our two locations, now we're just entering our 7th year. We've seen close to 60,000 kids through all of our grassroots programming in both countries, to get to a point now where, and we do a lot of work with the grassroots program, and we do grassroots coach development. We do programs around sustainability and health that are tied to the grassroots. But through that, we also use those as opportunities to identify talent, both sporting and scholastic, and trying to find pathways for these kids. Obviously, they all have dreams of being professional footballers, both our boys and girls, but also know that there are a lot of opportunities scholastically. And so of the 60,000, we have just over 100 who are now full-time residential in our programs, both in Malawi and Uganda. And so it's taking the time to spend with them, both on the pitch and in the classroom, which I'll get into a little bit, to give them the best chance to compete globally with, be it kind of as students or as athletes. And so how do we do that? I mentioned we have 3 pillars. And so obviously first is on the soccer side. And so we have invested in having international staff from a coaching standpoint, international curriculum, and we visited and worked with clubs and academies all over the world. And we believe that we deliver a program that competes with anywhere on the planet. And so it's providing full-time kind of residential training that's giving the kids the best chance to be able to kind of get the right level of nurturing and development, but also have the right level of demand on a daily basis, so that when they have an opportunity to compete outside of our own communities and outside of our countries and outside the continent, that they're ready to be able to do that. And there's just so few that are doing that globally. Like I mentioned earlier around West Africa, it's certainly ahead of where we are in our part of the world. And so there's an academy called Right to Dream that's in Ghana, who's been at it for 15 plus years already. And so they're just starting to see the benefits of the work that they've done for kids that are going off to Europe and growing in the game. For the first time, just had one of their players transfer to Ajax in the Netherlands, one of the biggest clubs kind of in that part of the world, on a transfer fee for 10 million euro or $10 million US. And so part of the benefit of doing that is obviously giving an opportunity to that young man, but then the dollars that come back into that to then be able to provide more opportunities for the community or for the kids in the communities that we work, and to be able to expand that work and reach more kids. And there's a real opportunity through the game to be able to do that. As I said earlier, it takes time, and it takes a long investment. Like I said, we're into year 7 and we're just starting to knock on the door of what that looks like, both scholastically and for our top talent, which I'll talk a little bit about. On the school side, school in both Malawi and Uganda is very rote. It's very old school. It's kind of what you would call chalk and talk. Somebody stands at the chalkboard and writes, and they talk a lot. You don't ask questions, you write notes and you do tests, and that's it. So there isn't a lot of problem solving. There isn't an opportunity to engage. Culture is very hierarchical. So questioning and challenging staff and having conversations in classrooms, and now the way we are understanding and evolving education in our communities simply doesn't exist. And so we try to supplement that, add to that. And we've been doing this with partner schools, but we're now exploring our own campus and site, which I'll talk about. But it's about doing more in the classroom and getting our kids comfortable with technology, and turning them into problem solvers and well-rounded students that could be leaders in their community. And then the third piece is society, which would encompass kind of how we think about the world in regards to our footprint. So we're spending a lot of time right now connected to sustainability and green, which I'll talk a little bit about. And we want to lead by example in our part of the world, also around our character development program. So focusing a lot on some of the soft skills and tools off the field. And we're working with organizations all over the world, not just on the continent, but elsewhere. And these are important things for all young people. And simple things around acceptance and our process, and focusing on the things that we control, around our emotional intelligence, around gratitude and kindness and all that, and building that into our program. I think the thing that we found with say sports or athletes or student athletes that have ventured off from our part of the world, they don't necessarily have the tools to be able to manage themselves independently in an environment where it really now becomes them against the world. This is a competitive, somewhat ugly profession, football. And so when you're out there, you need to have a lot of self-confidence. You need to be able to focus on the things that you control. You need to be put in tough and challenging situations at home to then be able to manage yourself, and do that, and be able to kind of put your world in a box and focus on you, and trying to be able to give the kids the tools to be able to do that. And so those are kind of the three pillars of what it is that we try to do on the ground. And like I said, it's starting to happen for us. So this is Zobran, who's from our setup in Malawi. He's at Taft School, which was one of the top independent prep schools in the US. It's in Connecticut. And he's a Davis Scholar, which gives him an additional scholarship and opportunities to go off to play. He's a great footballer who will play in the NCAA. And he's also going to be a neuroscience student in university. And so here's a kid from one of our programs who is now getting an opportunity to chase both a footballing and a scholastic dream. And, wherever that takes him, we'll see. But it's when you give kind of kids of talent and promise opportunity, or a promise opportunity, these are the things that can happen. So right now we have 5 global scholars. We'll have a 6th. So obviously with the pandemic and travel, it's been a bit of a mixed bag of our kids on the ground and doing distance education. But we have 2 right now in the United States, and 3 in Canada at a school partner at St. Andrews College in Aurora, which I'll get into a little bit. But we're also starting to have success beyond the classroom as well. We've had over 15 national team participants over the last 3 years through under 20, under 17, and under 15 national teams, both on the boys and girls side. And we have our first player who's in an AFCON, which is the African Championships, in an under 20 final for Uganda that they play Saturday against Ghana. So Jack Komakech, who's an 18-year-old goalkeeper for us at Ascent, will be starting in goal on Saturday for Uganda to win a continental championship. And so he's getting interest from clubs in Europe and elsewhere. And so those things are starting to happen for us. And we're starting to build both the scholastic as well as the sporting opportunities globally for our kids. And so here are a few of them that I mentioned. So on the left, that's Luhano. And so she's at Brooks School, which is in Massachusetts. She spent much of her pandemic in Seattle with the Seattle Reign, a professional setup there that's connected to the Sounders of the MLS. She's playing 2 age groups up as a 15-year-old with their under 17 setup, which includes US national team players at under 17. And she's kind of the top 10% in that group. She will be a national team player in Malawi. She will go on and be an NCAA Division I star in the US, and will have a professional pathway in the game. And she comes from a town called Mzuzu, which is very rural northern Malawi. Her mother was a school teacher. She would have never left Mzuzu if she wasn't identified from Ascent Soccer. And this kid's going to go on now and likely captain her national team one day, and go off on a pathway both scholastically and football wise. And so again, it's about the work to do the identification, and then do what we can to provide support scholastically and through soccer as well. And then on the other side are 2 of the boys that are at St. Andrews College in Aurora, just north of Toronto. So it's Canada's largest all boys boarding school. So Joffrey on the left is from Uganda. This is his 3rd year at St. Andrews. He graduates this year. He's going on a full scholarship to Dickinson College in Pennsylvania next year. And then Ali, who's on the right, he's graduating next year. So he's in his 2nd year at St. Andrews. He has 1 more year before he graduates. He already had professional training placements at Southampton in the UK, getting interest globally already. He was an under 20 national team call-up as a 15-year-old. And we've got lots of schools knocking on our door for his full scholarship and where he's going to end up in 2022. And so really great opportunities for these kids. And so we have a couple more who are on their way who are doing online school, who will end up with us as soon as kind of visas and travel allow. And so those pathways are starting to happen for our kids. And then maybe just to wrap, and then we can, we'll dig into some questions and conversation. Like I said earlier, now we've really landed on our first campus. Like we've been tenants, we've been partners, we partnered with schools and other charities on the ground in the places that we work, to be able to provide a well-rounded academic opportunity, but then also have the pitches and the facilities we need to train. We're right now going through our fundraise and our development to have our first campus in sight. With that, we're kind of wrapping our story in kind of empowering talent in East Africa with the name of being the greenest football club and academy on the continent. And so want to do everything that's off the grid, focused around sustainability and green. And we want our education and our academics to be outdoors and focus on the planet and kind of nurturing some leaders for tomorrow and doing that in a bit of a different way. And we're really excited about that, only because it's a really nice opportunity for us to lead by example. And both George and I kind of come to a place where we just believe it's how education needs to happen, not just in Africa, but we believe it needs to happen everywhere. And also at a necessity. We work in places where there is not a lot of infrastructure. Power is not dependable. Accessible water is difficult. Drinkable water. Resources are few, and so we can do well, be more stable, be more successful, and also do that by doing better for the planet at the same time. And so that's our vision over the next, and that's going to be a development plan and the things that we're doing over the next few years and the next iteration of what we do with Ascent Soccer. And so I wanted to leave it there, and then I'm happy to kind of leave it open to kind of questions and comments, and my contacts there too. So I'm happy we can leave that on the recorded version or whatever, if people want to get in touch or find us at Ascent Soccer. If you go to the website, obviously you can find a lot more about us there. There's some videos and background on all the kids. You can see some of the highlight reels and some of our talent. We also run a podcast called The Climb. So if anyone's interested, and on that, we focus the podcast less on the game and more in and around how we think about the world on our kind of social part and our character development. So we talk to people in football, but we also talk to people who, do advocacy and work with young people who are thinking about youth development. So we're all over the shop with that. So it's some interesting conversations that benefit our kids, but then also we're hoping benefit other kind of teachers and mentors and folks that work with young people. So I'm happy to leave it there and open it up and have a bit of a Q&A.
That's awesome. I was, when we were kind of getting ready for the webinar with you, there's just so much information. So that was such a great way and concise way to capture everything. And I know you've obviously left out tons of information, but it's the highlights for sure. Like that was perfect. So thank you. One of the things that I'll kind of go back to that really resonated with me is the at the very beginning when you're talking about, it's not this linear progression where I have an idea and it's going to go, because I think that's the way we find a lot of students when we talk about resilience and, they feel like it's more challenging than they thought. I think because they think that all of us have finished school and gotten a job and stayed there and done well and then bought a house. And I think the more conversations we have around normal is going to be looking like this. I think it's so healthy, because I think that too helps build resilience when they know that's most people's paths. Is it going to be that straight linear direction of my going to skyrocket my career? Here I go. I'm stepping out of the foot of my campus to this amazing job. So I love when that message is included whenever we do this or some podcasts, because I think it's a really important message for sure.
Yeah, no, it's something we've been thinking a lot about. It's funny, I did a podcast recording yesterday. It won't come up for a little while, but with Chris Guluwalk, he's the writer of the $100 Startup and Side Hustle. He has this podcast called Side Hustle School, and we were just talking about that his trajectory and kind of how he ended up where he did. But he uses this language always around, trying to find an unconventional pathway for an unconventional world. And so it is very unconventional and it's changing so fast. And we just talked a lot about kind of indifference in regards to, can we be indifferent to the things that aren't necessarily important and just focus what's in front of us and not get too caught up in all the other distractions and things that are going on out there. And so it's, yeah, something we've been trying to talk a lot about with our kids. There's this, I beat this drum over and over, just around social media, and this desire to kind of have an opinion about everything. That it's, there's an issue, so I need to know something about it. And if I don't know, I'm going to ask that crowd, and I'm just going to be whatever they say. I'm going to be that because I like those people. And I think it's also okay to say, I don't know enough, so I'm going to pass, or I'm going to not have an opinion about that, and just focus on the things that are important, which is hard to do when we're getting beat over the head with some of this stuff too. But yeah, it's a lot of what we talk about in our character development program and the things that we do with our kids, for sure.
You were talking about the pathway there, and someone actually was asking, how did you deal with the growth of the Gulu Walks right from the start? Like you mentioned that by day 2, you were getting noticed and getting picked up by the Star. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I think it got up to 100 countries were doing Gulu Walks. So how did you deal with that growth so quickly?
Yeah, so yeah, and not intentionally. I think we were just very good at letting it go and letting kind of folks in local communities lead. I think, we were providing a bit of a brand and a bit of a hook that would then give them momentum. They could kind of tag on to some of the early success that we had, but not getting too caught up in it going wrong or going sideways. I think for us, and this is maybe working on the ground as long as we have to, like, I feel like there is an unrealistic and an unjust lens of fear of the things that could go wrong around what we do and we don't do. And I think we don't do things because we're worried, well, if we give them the keys to it, what if they do this? And what if they do that? And so we're kind of always been, if the intention is right, so we talk a lot about intent. And so if the intention's right and it goes wrong, where are we? So maybe someone has made a mistake. It's interesting when our intentions are off and we're trying to be crafty, clever, underhanded about something, is when things go wrong, or when there's blowback, or when there's bad media, things like that happen. And so we've just been try to be, to really let go and allow those things to, I think, we've said, if it is what it is and it grew to what it did because we let go. I think if we strangled it and hung on for dear life and said, well, we got to control this, we got to control that, a lot of people would have said no thank you, because there would have been all these hoops, right, to jump through, and all these all these things and boxes that you needed to check. And so that's not really how advocacy or movement grows, or how a network grows either. I think maybe on that, even with the podcast like that we're doing, we've started a new co-hosting with it. So George and I are co-hosting. And so I do the interview, and then we go back and listen, and then we talk about it. And this is the first couple in the new season. The first one we did, we're like, that's terrible. Like, we didn't think it was very good, but we're like, the new thing is no one's paying attention anyway. So just put it out there. And no one's thinking about me 20 minutes later after. They might go, that probably could have been better, but no one's calling me or, calling us out. And so I think we probably think we're way more important in other people's lives when stuff goes wrong than we actually are. Embarrassing things happen. I deal this with my own kids. Like, they're like, well, I don't want to do that because then I'll be embarrassed. And I'm like, well, what about that time when whoever did that embarrassing thing, when was the next time you thought about it? And they'd be like, well, never. I go, exactly. They're not thinking about you either, right? So, I think we get very self-absorbed. So I think it's just kind of letting that go. I think, and like I would say, lastly, it's funny, we were talking about this morning. We had a conversation. We were going to call somebody, but we got lucky too. Like it was good. It was really good timing. And so, when Angie was saying about the squiggly line off the top, like, we got really, really lucky what happened when it happened. And we got a bit of media. We had to do the things we did to be in the right place to get lucky. But even for our top players, like, let's talk about Jack, who's now at the under 20s for AFCON. He's going to play in a final on Saturday where every scout on the planet is going to watch that match. If he has a good match, his trajectory will change forever. Well, how ridiculous is it that 90 minutes is going to potentially decide his life? And if he doesn't save a penalty in the quarters in a shootout, they never even see the semifinals, no longer the finals, and no one's even going to hear his name or know his name unless. So you got to put yourselves in positions to just get lucky as well, and accept that that is, a lot of the big success you see out there is people did the work, But a lot of it's timing and luck as well.
Which is probably even more challenging now, versus 2005 when you started, because the world is that much more full of, and the internet is that much more full of other people that are competing for the same or similar things. I'm just going to go back to the pillars that you mentioned. So soccer, school, and society. I was on a webinar last week, and it was with a researcher in resilience, and he had said, our individual resilience depends on the support we receive from others and opportunities to use our talents. And that really, as you were speaking about the pillars, and the character development, it's not just providing somebody, okay, give me that plastic ball and here's a real soccer ball, here's some shoes, go to it. It's providing, everybody needs to know what supports are around them and to serve their whole being, and not just, and for them to be a good soccer player. It's just not gonna cut it.
That whole issue of resilience, you would have folks that have the impression that our kids would all be hyper resilient because they come from nothing. Right. And they have, they grew up playing barefoot and and now they have all these things. But they have their own level of comfort. And so we still have to continue to do those things in different ways. And I agree. I think it's a nurturing, and it goes back to, just around kind of the letting go as well. I think we have to be nurturing. We have to be hyper demanding. And we also have to sometimes let it get really messy and fail, and give the kids the chance to figure it out. And little things like when we'll run sessions or a free game after a session that maybe focus on a certain topic or a theme, maybe intentionally not refereeing that and let the kids self-regulate it. They self-regulate the theme or the topic that is the condition on that small-sided activity, but then also we don't referee it, call line calls, call fouls. They need to manage it because they need to figure it out on their own. And so just little things like that, putting them in situations where they need to own it, and don't think that someone's just going to bail it out, or they can turn to somebody to, that's why people are screaming, yelling at referees. And I could go on for hours about the examples we get of that nonsense at the pro game. But it's all about kind of having the messiness. I think for training, and I would just say being in Uganda as long as we were and how hard it was at times, I'm now a big believer, like the messiest, ugliest training sessions are likely your best ones. And probably similarly in the classroom. We're always worried people are watching and we want it to look just so, and I want that student to ask that question and then I'll hammer this and it will be off to the races. And that might look nice and tidy. It's probably not your best session, or it's probably not the one where kids learned the most either. So that's a hard thing to do. And I'm not saying that because I'm an expert at it now, but we try to think about that and be maybe a little more intentional about that for sure. Yeah.
We had Chris Creamer on, former Durham College grad that started up a website, sportslogos.net, and he was talking about how he had a regular job beforehand and he had to take the risk of doing the entrepreneurship, going out on his own and starting the website, and became really popular. Doing some reading on yourself, you actually moved to Uganda with your family and things like that. Was there ever fear going, like changing, like moving continents or things like that to start this up? Or like, was there a fear factor involved, or how did you get over that?
Yeah, crazily enough, no. It was funny because when we had the idea to do this, and I went out and did a fundraise and talked to people that engaged in our advocacy and said, here's my new crazy idea. And we ended up getting to a point where we knew we were going to be able to maybe have a 2-year runway to give this a try. I quickly found out no one was going to write a check or support this unless I was on the ground running it. And so I went to my wife and said, I think I can do this. I think we could make it happen. But we're going to need to be on the ground and move to Uganda. I'm like, what do you think? And she's like, let's go. And away we went. And so it was really that fast. It was crazy. Like that would have been in May of 2014. And we were on a plane in December and gone. And so, yeah, it just happened. I sold it to my kids, foolish or not. I sold it to them as, hey, if you want to play professional soccer or you want to go off to the NCAA and get a scholarship, this is going to be the best development opportunity you're ever going to have. And it was amazing for my kids. And so, and it's funny, like, I spent lots of time in northern Uganda in the midst of a civil war. And we had times where we were under curfew. We couldn't go out at night. We weren't allowed to travel between towns without a military escort. And I never felt unsafe, which is strange and bizarre. There's there is something around community and a connection of people and how folks look each other in the eye and how linked folks are day to day there. That's very different from here. That just does give you, whether real or imagined, sense of comfort. And so I never had any fear going there at all. I never felt unsafe. And like I said, when we started and we went and took the plunge, for us, it was mostly for our kids as well. It's like, if this is a colossal failure and we only stay for 2 years and it doesn't happen, like how transformed will they be? Because most families that we bump into when we travel and across the continent as well, like it's a lot of young families, toddlers, young kids. No one's doing that with, 11 and a 14-year-old boy. Like they were the only white teenage boys in northern Uganda. And so, but those are formative years. And so like, that's with them forever. They're transformed because of it. And so that in itself was worth it. But yeah, we never had no fear and no worry about it. And yeah, that might've been naive and it worked out fine, but yeah, here we are. Yeah.
That's awesome. I had a question for you, if you don't mind, because we'll be sharing this. Obviously, lots of people will be watching it, but a few special or unique groups would be varsity students. So I received your emails regularly, and one that really piqued my interest was the possibility of an internship. So do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So there's tons of ways at it. I guess first what we have posted right now, we'll talk about that and then other ways, but we're right now looking for a social media intern to do some storytelling for us. Like we're right at the cusp where we're doing a lot of it internally. We have a part-time staff who helps with my operations and fundraising, who's doing a bit of that out of Washington, DC. But in this remote digital world, we're about to grow, we hope, and get a lot bigger. And so it's an opportunity for someone to engage in our social media platforms on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and everywhere else around media and video as well. Potentially a chance to travel to East Africa and spend some time at our programs. We're about to dig deep on both telling the stories of our kids scholastically and professional pathways, but also start to tell a sustainability and green story. And so, yeah, it's an exciting time. We're setting up it as an internship, which could grow into a full-time role really quickly, based on some of the momentum that we have. And so, yeah, so that's one that's out there now. And I think there's also opportunities, be it in media, so video and storytelling and social for sure. We also are, open to kind of short-term, both coaching and teaching opportunities. So we want to continue to expose our kids to other international kind of teachers and coaches, learn new ideas, get in front of new groups and new challenges. So there are kind of those opportunities that are available either through the summer months or for a 6-month stay, where we're happy to help make some of those happen either in our site in Uganda or in Malawi as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. Just on, you're talking about telling your story. Now there is, when you started Gulu Walks, there, like the way to get noticed was going to the newspapers. You mentioned Global Channel Star, but now with the big social media boom, but there's so much noise out there, so many stories. Just how are you trying to like break through and get that story told once again, right? Like, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. It's probably a bit of what I said earlier. It's trying to be, without stretching ourselves too thin, I think it's trying to be as many places as we can and kind of be in an opportune place for that moment where we get that right share or those right set eyeballs and it happens. So I think, and we haven't done enough of that yet. I think it's professionalizing our storytelling, making our video better and our stories better, and kind of telling more journeys of our kids. And then, being on more platforms. That's why we're doing the podcast. And we're trying to do them. I think with all of that, we're trying to, we don't like to just kind of trumpet and be selling. So we like to try to do it with an element of giving. That's why we do the podcast. We hope that people are going to learn something from it. We want to, engage people. And if we benefit from it, great. And similar with what we're doing with green and sustainability. And we think that's a big opportunity for us, to be honest. I think we're still this kind of unique, quirky, weird academy in the middle of nowhere for a lot of people. And even people who won't know the game, like no one knows who we are. Like we talk about Right to Dream in Ghana as like the standard, like the kind of flag bearer for academies on the continent. And we could talk to major clubs in Europe, and we're talking multi-million-dollar clubs, and I say Right to Dream to them and their eyes glaze over. They've never even heard of it. And so we're still this kind of niche small thing. And so we kind of see green too and sustainability and the ethos there as an opportunity for us to lead and maybe also kind of garner a new audience and not just be another football academy, but actually be in front of an issue as well. That's important to us. And so we're hoping that will get us some momentum as well.
Yeah, it just must be awesome to see the success of some of the athletes that have gone through the program and now are being on the national team. And as you mentioned, playing in the NCAA. So that's awesome to see there.
Yeah, it's funny. It's good for you to remind us of that because we don't stop and think about that. And so it sometimes takes others to do it because we always think more about our challenges tomorrow and, why that went wrong. Because in working in places that we do, it's kind of, everybody talks about kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It really is like 2 steps forward, 1.9 steps back every time we do something. It's hard to work where we work. And so you have to be patient. And so, yeah, so we could probably get better at stopping and having a little more gratitude for some of the wins. But yeah, no, it's been great to see some of the pathways for some of our kids that are already starting to come together for sure.
Well, that maybe answered my next question for you, is going to be, what are the biggest challenges and biggest rewards that you've had so far? Is that?
Yeah. So yeah, biggest challenge, certainly for me off the top, I think I have been and very focused on the details. I have been a bit of a planner. How we goal set and how we plan has changed dramatically. You could say maybe I was a bit of a control freak on some details. I am not anymore, especially now, maybe in my day-to-day life, there's still plenty of OCD and all that, but on how we run the organization, that's changed quite a bit. Kind of living off the mantra, there's a Winston Churchill quote, but if you throw stones at every dog that barks, you're probably not going to get to your destination. And so I was throwing a lot of stones early on. I was taking on every fight and that didn't get us anywhere. There's a lot of standing still. And so a lot better at picking our battles and having patience and you have to live be in a challenging situation like that. Like even folks who work in the places we work, who maybe fundraise, who don't spend extended time there, maybe they go in and out for a couple of weeks, don't see it. Like you need to live and be a part of it. There are lots of amazing things you learn, but yeah, it is hard. So I'd say that has been the biggest challenge. And because, like I said in the presentation, getting people to think long-term and to not have to have an immediate win or a success 6 months from now is hard, really, really hard. And that's people who maybe know academics well, or people who know football well and who live in the game. And we're talking at the highest levels, at the top professional teams and the governing bodies that manage all of this. Even there, it doesn't exist. Everything exists 6 months at a time. And so that's been really difficult. Biggest wins. Yeah, like obviously the global scholars and our kids in the national team is obvious. I think some of the ones that stick with me or kind of bring me the most joy would be more our kids that come to us that are off the charts footballers, but are maybe really weak students or really shy characters. And then to see them after 2 years, like be a voice in a training session or in a classroom is amazing to watch. I think of our girls, like I think it was Diana was one of our tiny little girl that came in at 10 years old, very rough around the edges footballing wise, but a really super athlete, would not say a word. But scored really well. We do a lot of testing as the kids come in to get a sense of what we think their potential is as students. It's not the only thing that we do. We do interviews and things as well, but we try to get a sense of them, but scored really well. So we knew there was lots there. And it took us a year to get, and so she came in probably 2017. And then the last time I was able to be on a plane and be in a group in February there. So that would have been kind of 2.5 years later. She is running the show and it's amazing. Like, I love it. It's like we had trialists in, boys and girls in as trialists, and we make them get in front of the group and talk to us and tell their story just to get a sense of they have tools and can they be brave. And she basically ran the whole session. I just let her take it. And it was wild to see. And so those things are those are more rewarding than the big ones. Like those are super fun to watch. Like whether she goes on and plays football, whether she leaves Uganda or doesn't, like her transformation and what she will become is forever changed. And that's a ton of fun to see that stuff.
Nice. And the reward for your own family too must be amazing. That, like you said, you have had this experience with your family that is so unique and so amazing, and likely brought you closer together, which is awesome too.
Yeah. We talk about it a lot. Like we stole a lot of extra hours with our own children, because these were prime, get your license, go do your own thing, hang out with your friends. And they were just stuck with us 24/7 for 5 years. And so, so that was pretty amazing. Like both my kids, my 21-year-old and 18-year-old don't have their license yet because of that, right? We were living in Uganda and we lived downtown Toronto. And so they weren't in a hurry. So, so we stole a lot of extra hours and had a lot of time together. And so that was amazing, because we know, they're going to go off and have their own and do all their own stuff soon. So that was great for sure. Yeah.
Any kind of last things for people that are watching that you would want, like kind of one takeaway for students that are watching them kind of embarking on their own life that you would want to share with them?
I had a student reach out to me about a month ago who's just was looking at and now started an MBA, was asking us about volunteering, was looking at doing, going and doing some short-term visits. And he's like, I really want to do development work. I really want to be a quote unquote entrepreneur. I want to learn. What would you suggest? And I said to him, like, go somewhere, anywhere that you've never been, and spend at least 6 months there. And I think not just to have a greater appreciation for the planet, but if you're talking about being an entrepreneur and, getting your hands dirty and learning how to do things in a different way, you'll learn way more there in 6 months than you'd be 6 years kind of doing it here. And so and when you can, and you're not tied and you don't have the house and the car and the family and all that, you get out of here. And I know that's harder now in the midst of a pandemic, but hopefully that will change soon. I'd encourage folks to get out there. And I didn't do it until, very, very late in my life. And I took a plunge when a lot of people weren't. And so, but I would, and it's amazing. Like if I think back to our podcast and people we talk to, almost everybody who's kind of found their legs or kind of been an achiever in a really independent way wandered off somewhere, either during university or after university. There's a theme there. It happens. It's fascinating to see. I think it's important for us to kind of all grow up and get a better sense of who we are. So leave it with that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Did you have any questions left, Scott?
No, that's perfect. And we're coming up on the hour now. So
that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Adrian. It's just, it's so amazing and so nice that this Oshawa boy has made such a big mark in the world. Don't often hear that about Oshawa, so it's nice to get to share those stories when we can, for sure. So I really appreciate your time and such valuable information. And I know it'll be a popular webinar that's watched on our webinar series and on Campus Rec. So thank you so much for your time. And I love getting your all your updates through email too. So, and if you're a student watching this and you have some questions, feel free to reach out. Adrian shared his contact information. If you're interested in the internship, then he has some really great opportunities for sure. And I know, just as you were mentioning, Scott, like Chris Creamer and Andy McNamara, who have done these with us too, and both DC grads as well, have said mentors have been so important to them. So it's nice of you to share your time. And I know you're mentoring lots of students in your program, but you might hear from a couple of ours too. So thank you in advance if somebody does reach out.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.